Today we're going to have quite a few participants that are coming out this afternoon, so just make sure that you've got your video cameras off and that you have yourselves on mute. We will go through a bit more housekeeping because we are expecting a large number of people. We'll get started here in just a couple of minutes. If you can join the instructions. You also should be able to see on the screen here, we'll be able to have some live looks at where people are and where you're joining us from in the country. So on your Mentimeter now, you should be able to make a selection around where you're from in the country. So if you guys wouldn't mind to kind of pop those up on the screen, that would be absolutely fantastic. And then we'll get started here in just a few minutes. Okay, it's 2 minutes past. I think what I'll do is I will get started if that's okay with everyone. Just want to let you know that we have a fully interactive event, and welcome to the National tED event. Before I make introductions to the rest of our team, we've got a couple of questions for you before we hear from our clinical leads. So if you wouldn't mind to join menti.com, either from your PC or your phone, let us know where you're coming to us from today across the country. We're also going to have a Q&A session around tED and the outcomes from our speakers. So please put those questions through for menti.com. That will pop up here in just a few minutes as we kind of calculate where everybody's coming from in the country. So please be brave. It's completely anonymous. If you're not comfortable using Menti, please feel free to use the chat if you're able to go through. We will continue to pop the Menti codes up into the chat as we move through. And I think what we'll do is we'll have a look and see what we've got coming through from the country now. So a lot of national team members, so really, really nice to see. One lone person from the Northwest, so hopefully you'll have some more people joining you shortly. But good representation coming through from across the country. What I'd like to do right now is bring onto the screen and introduce some of the team whilst we're going through this. So if I could, I'm going to ask the rest of our participants if you could please drop your video down so that we can just have our speakers and the team up on the screen. That would be absolutely fantastic. First, I would like to introduce myself. I'm Shelley Roberts. I'm the design and delivery lead for the ESIS to IUEC offer. So that is my role within the team, and I'll be chairing the session today. And I'm going to pass you over to Chris Moulton.
Hi there, thank you for joining us today. I'm Chris Moulton, I'm the GERF lead for emergency medicine, and of course I'm very, very keen on all the data and things that lie behind this, and believe this is a real chance for us to make an improvement to, as you know, a rather failing system that we've got in this country at the moment.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. I'd next like to introduce Jenny Sears-Brown. Jenny, if you could introduce yourself to our colleagues.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Jenny Sears-Brown. I'm part of the IUEC GERF team and been taking tED forward over the last 12 months. And so I look forward to sharing what we've been doing with you. Thanks, Jelly.
Oh, thanks, Jen. Matthew, could I get you to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Matthew Eustace, I'm Workstream Manager working alongside Shelley within IUEC, and our remit is around the national rollout of tED. So that's me. Nice to see you all.
Great. Thank you so much. Emily, can I come to you next to introduce yourself as one of our speakers today?
Hi everyone. Yes, I'm Emily. I'm the Urgent Emergency Care Transformation Lead in Hereford and Worcestershire, and we did tED a few months ago now, last year, and I'm here to talk to you about my experience in our system. So really great to be here. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Emily. And next, I'd like to introduce Andrew Cox. Andrew, could you tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Andrew. I work with the Integrated Urgent care team and UEC team in NHS England London. I'm the regional DOS lead, and similarly to Emily, have also done sort of the rollout with North Central London and the ATED process there with them. So I'm going to talk about our experience of doing that in that area of the region.
Great. Thanks so much, Andrew. Just to kind of keep things and keep the bandwidth, because we are expecting a high number of people today. If you're not one of the speakers, and if you're not speaking on here today, or any of our team members, if I could please ask for you to drop your video feeds down, just so we can keep those minimized on the screen there. And then we will get cracking. So just to kind of run through, I'm going to hopefully share my screen, and you guys should hopefully be able to see it. Right. Hopefully everybody can see that now. I'm going to take you through the event really quick, as far as what's happening with the agenda. Can everybody see that okay? Excellent. Thanks, Jen. So you've heard from some of our key speakers today. This is just a bit of an overview of the session. So you're going to hear about an introduction to ATED, a bit of a walkthrough, its background, and its principles. I'm then going to have a really short video to actually show you how you use ATED. It is that simple, but it's obviously doesn't take 2 minutes to do. So please take it for the context that it is, which is a bit of a whistle-stop tour for you on how to use the tool and how it's used. We will then hear from our alumni speakers, from Emily first, and we'll take a few questions through Menti if that's okay. Then we're going to have a quick 5-minute break for you to nip out. We'll then have Andrew come back, and then we have a full Q&A session for you to ask our expert panel members any questions that you might have. We will ask that if you could please drive those questions through the Menti website. We are going to record this session. It will be available on NHS Futures, as well as we will get the PDF pack out to all of the invited members that are on the call today. So let me just nip around through this. Again, please use the Mentimeter code box that you can see within the chat. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Please keep yourself muted unless you're speaking. Please use Mentimeter on your PC or tablet or phone. Listen and participate. Keep those cameras off if you can to help us with the bandwidth. The slide pack will be sent out. We're a clinically and data-driven collaborative approach in our team. Innovations are more difficult than ever, so this is just one of the many that are out there. So please come along with us on our journey. Practical cases, practical improvement, that's what we're really about. Just ask. We might have the answer. If we don't have the answer, we'll definitely find out through our team's approach. And then there's also our email address, which Louise or Sarwar will pop into the chat for you. So if you are interested in ATED, please do email the team, and we will absolutely set up some time for you. So next, what I'd like to do is bring onto the screen, if that's okay, Chris and Jenny. I'm going to rattle through a few things. I am going to move on to the next slide. In the background here, you'll be able to see questions for our expert panel. So please use those through Menti, put those questions on. And if you have a question that's similar to someone else, give it a thumbs up, and we'll take the most liked questions first, if that's okay. Overall, I'm next going to pop this over to Chris and Jenny. I'm just going to move on to the next slide here. All right, guys, over to you.
Thanks, Shelley. So, as I said earlier, thank you all for taking the time to show an interest and learn more about ATED. ATED is Alternatives to ED, and we look at it through a very pragmatic, objective lens. So what we do with ATED is that we ask 3 questions based around very common daily clinical scenarios. And we ask 3 questions. And first question we ask is there a service profiled on the directory of services that could accommodate the clinical scenario that we're dealing with? The second question we ask is that service, whether or not it's profiled on the DOS or not, being commissioned? And then the third question we ask is whether or not that service is doing what it says on the tin. So what is the reality of accessibility, consistency of access on a daily basis? So the example that we like to give is there's a question in ATED regarding accessibility into same-day emergency care, both in the surgical and the medical scenario. So we asked the question whether or not we can access same-day emergency care, and we asked the question if it's profiled on the DOS. If it's profiled on the DOS, the next question we ask is it profiled to the national standard of 12 hours a day, 7 days a week? If it is, tick. Then we ask our commissioner if it's commissioned. If it is, tick, etc. Then we go out to all our system stakeholders. So we basically bring all our system stakeholders around the table and we ask the question, same day emergency care, profiled on the DOS, 7 days a week, 12 hours a day, commissioned as per intended. So what's the day-to-day reality of using that service? Now, it could be that the SDEC service is at capacity at 10 o'clock because they've done the pull from ED early doors. Could be that the SDEC has been bedded overnight, so it's not coming online till late in the afternoon. Or it could be that the last patient into that service is 5 o'clock in the afternoon to allow for that processing to take place. So that's the sort of stuff that we tease out through ATED. And as I said, we look at alternatives to ED, both based within the acute setting and out in the community setting. Bolted onto those clinical scenarios, we've added another 6 scenarios that look at alternatives to admission. So we look at how you use your intermediate care beds, your enhanced clinical services around IVs, your virtual wards, etc. So we look at approximately 40 avenues of clinical scenarios. We tease out what is really going on, and then we produce a report for you at the end of the sessions that basically identifies what's going well within your systems and where your gaps are. What I must emphasise from this point of view is that we do not view this exercise as performance management. It is purely aimed at improvement. So we will not hold you to account when you undertake an ATED exercise. It is there to facilitate the opportunities to be identified for your system and potential improvement stroke transformation. And when we bring on our speakers later, Andrew and Emily, they will give that real life experience of going through ATED and how it's helped steer their systems through that process. So as I say, that is ATED. I'm sure we'll have many questions as we go through the session. Chris, anything else you'd like to add on before we go on back to Shelley?
Well, I think, yeah, you've said it all, Jenny, because you're so experienced at running these sessions. The only thing perhaps I would say is just that, you know, all of you will be aware that people say, oh, too many people go to ED and that, you know, the patient should know better. The EDs see too many patients, they should turn them away. What we have to understand is that patients don't go to EDs because they're stupid, and ED doctors don't see patients because they've got nothing better to do. The reason people go to EDs is because there's nowhere else for them to go. You can't go to a service that doesn't exist, and you can't go to a service that you can't contact, and you can't go to a service that's closed. So if you can't go to a service, you really nowhere else to go. I had this experience last week. My son-in-law had a bad cellulitis of his arm in the middle of the Midlands. Just nowhere else for him to go. Everybody he contacted said go to the ED at Leighton Hospital. So patients aren't stupid. It's just there's nowhere else for them to go. And so what we're trying to do is to look at those alternatives and really, you know, identify what's missing. We're not trying to criticize people for it not being there. We're not trying to give them a score, really, although we do. And we're certainly not, as Jenny said, we're certainly not trying to use this as some kind of performance management. What we want to do is identify the alternatives that aren't there and give the systems, that's to say you, a chance to maybe, if possible, provide at least some of those alternatives for patients. to decongest the EDs partly, but also to make sure that patients get the best possible service. Does that fit, Jenny? Do you think that fits with what we're trying to do?
Absolutely, absolutely. Thanks, Chris. Shelley, back to yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just wanted to make one more reference for you guys. Chris, if you wouldn't mind to also correlate ATED along with the SEDIT and the GIRFT information before I get into the actual kind of tool and how it works, because we're doing a little video. But if you could talk about how that correlates into ATED and what we use to flush that out so people know that it's a triangulated approach.
Yeah, thank you. Well, GIRFT, as you know, is all about the data for emergency medicine. It's a data-driven approach because the NHS is very good at giving us opinions, very good at good ideas, but not always good at following the data. So GIRFT is, as you know, getting it right first time. Well, we obviously didn't, otherwise we wouldn't have that organisation, would we? But we're trying to get it right second time at least, and we're going to try and do that by driving it with the data. So we have the GIRFT for emergency medicine data now online. It's online, updated every month as what we call the SEDIT, the Summary Emergency Department Indicator Table, and the Summary Emergency Ambulance Indicator Table too. So we've got the data online, and some of those figures we use in ATED because the ATED score was originally we designed it to be a GIRFT metric, and it will be a GIRFT metric one day when we've got enough scores, but we use at the moment some of the SEDIT metrics. You'll see those as we go through it. We use those to drive the ATED and to provide a bit more absolute numerical accuracy to it. Is that enough, Shirley?
That's great, Chris. Thank you so much. Just to let everybody know, please use the Menti information. Obviously, if you're not comfortable using Menti or you're not in a place where you can do that, feel free to ask some of the questions in the chat. Jenny and Chris will be floating around as we play the video. Just to say, I'm going to play a video next. I'm going to ask Chris and Jenny if it's okay if they stop sharing their video feed so we can save the bandwidth. But please do feel free to ask those questions in the Q&A, like and give us a bit of a thumbs up around those. So I'm just going to share my screen really quickly, and hopefully you guys will be able to hear that sound. If it would be okay, once it starts to play, if people wouldn't mind to give me a bit of a thumbs up once this is up and playing, just so that I know that you can hear the background there. Hi, welcome to ATED. I'm going to take you through the online tool and report today. You've already heard from Chris and Jenny about the ethos and how ATED was created. ATED's an easy-to-use online improvement tool that works over the course of 3 phases. Let's start you off with phases 1 and 2. To get started, you just need to book in a walkthrough with one of our ATED specialists. Once that's done, we'll be able to sign you up with your nhs.net account to be able to access your ICS and your acute sites. Once you're in, you just need to find those acute sites that you're going to input the data. This is usually done with your DOS lead and the UEC commissioner. Don't worry, it only takes about 30 to 45 minutes, and they usually work together to complete this. Here you can see the Hospital ATED tab. It's very intuitive and it's easy to use. Here you can see Hospital 1. Don't worry, you don't even need to complete this section. This will be done by our ATED team. You can see below that it has drop-down menus with question and answer such as yes or no. There's also some areas to put in some standard working hours and some additional DOS information. The commissioners just need to say, yes is above, yes but different to above, or no. We'll take you through more details with the DOS lead and the commissioners. The second phase is a bit of a supportive check and challenge. Once this has been completed, don't worry, we're going to be here with you every step of the way. We'll make sure that all your data is correct and up to date. Once you've completed phases 1 and 2, let's talk about phase 3. Phase 3 works in a wider virtual session with multiple partners working across this, as you can see on the screen. So once you've completed ATED, what's next? What we do is we provide a bespoke reporting system for you to be able to outline your opportunities that come out of your phase 3 session. You can see a couple of snaps of them here on the screen. Once you receive this report, we'll be able to take you through to identify opportunities that align to your in-hospital areas, your out-of-hospital areas, and your admission avoidance areas. You can see here on the screen that we've also now aligned the UEC recovery plan as a primary column and a secondary column. This will allow you to start to prioritize some of those areas. If you have any more questions, contact us around ATED. You'll hear more about it today. I hope everybody was able to hear that okay. A couple of thumbs up would be nice if people were able to actually hear that video. That video will be available. It's just a bit of a snippet to kind of give you some ideas around how ATED works as far as some of the process around the actual tool. As with anything, it is slightly a bit more complex than that whenever you're running through it. But it was just to give you a bit of a snippet around the tool and how it's used. If you do have any more questions, I'll ask Louise to pop into the chat the email address. Please get in contact with us. We're more than happy to give you your own one-to-one walkthrough. And if you are interested in undertaking a TED in your area, please do get in contact with us. We're more than happy to go with you on that. I'm now going to pass along this information. And if I could have Jenny pop back up on the screen, I'd like for her to introduce our next speaker, if that's okay. Jenny, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Shelley. So I'd like to introduce Emily. Emily comes from the Worcestershire system, and Emily and myself facilitated the Worcestershire system going through their ATED. And knowing the system like we both do, myself and Emily have worked together for many years, and I have to say, you think you know your system, but when you do ATED, it certainly gave us a view from a very, very different lens. Would you not agree, Emily? And it was absolutely fantastic to have the system partners working together and talking together, and some of the outputs. Well, I'm not going to steal Emily's thunder, but without any further ado, Emily, over to yourself, please.
Thanks so much, Jenny. So I'm going to share my screen, so hopefully this will work. Tell me if you can all see that.
That looks good, Emily.
Yeah.
We can see it.
Great. Okay, so I'm here today to hopefully give you an example of ATED in practice. So what you could do with it after you have completed your ATED. I'll talk about our experience as a system and how you could approach moving forward after completing ATED, and just give you some examples of the kind of conversations that we had. And I'm sure that many of you will recognise the anecdotes and challenges that I'm going to mention in your own systems. There's two things to note. Firstly, I'm going to share some opportunity data that we collected in the actions following ATED, and I'll show you essentially the slides that I presented to our senior leads as an evaluation of this process. But we've moved on a lot since then, so don't hold us to our SDEC numbers, please, because we have through this process and other processes we've moved on a lot. Secondly is that when Shelley talked through the process now, it's very different to when I did it last year, and actually in summary it's even easier for you now, so you'll have lots and lots of support. And although Jenny and Linda were really supportive towards me and my system, and our DOS lead Sam, who helped me so much during this, it's even easier now. They have a dashboard, they help you with all the invites and things, so it's a really great system now. So if I go on to the next slide, so hopefully it'll become clear, but the really important thing, and it's already been mentioned, is that this is not performance management. It's an opportunity, and those embarking on this process need to really understand that message and need to get it over to the stakeholders that this is an opportunity. We can measure the opportunities, not we're doing badly. Setting the scene, we're a really challenged system. We had generally a lack of awareness around services in our system, and we don't use our alternatives to ED as much as we'd like, and there's a lot of frustration of the complexity in our system. So the key objective of ATED was really to get that honest feedback. What is it like? And that was the tagline I used when getting together the attendees, is you tell us what it's really like. And actually people were hooked because they really wanted to get it out. They wanted to get their frustrations out. Why can't they access, why they're not using alternatives, and for the services to get back to us why they things aren't as good as they would like them to be. But it all had a really positive, non-blame approach, and I think that's really important, is to really encourage everyone to be open and honest. We just want to get the truth, and then we can move forward from that, and then create an action plan, which I'm going to talk to you about. In terms of the forum, like I said, ATED, the team in ATED have a lot of tools now to help you set up the forum, but getting the right attendees is really paramount. Getting the doers in the system is really important. There's a lot of scenarios. I think there's 40 scenarios. We only did half of them, so we split it into in hospital and out of hospital. So we did the out of hospital more recently. I'm going to discuss the in hospital scenarios. That helps just so that there's some stakeholders that won't be sat there with nothing to do. It makes sure that you've got the right people, and also it takes a while and there's lots of really good discussion and you don't want to have to rush through. And we also just did one place because our both places are fairly different, so we decided to do that, but you decide what's right for your team. And what I'm hoping as I go through is you'll get a lot of, oh, that sounds like my system. So yeah, I'll start to talk through the actual process now. So these are the objectives that we set out and then the outcomes. So the primary aim was to collaborate and learn through honest and open discussion. And what we wanted to do was get that intangible anecdotal information into tangible actions that we could improve upon. You know, those conversations that me and Jenny would have in the corridor of A&E as nurse in charge and Halo of, oh, well, the crew called, but they couldn't access it. And the GP tried, but they couldn't get into this service. And although they would accept, they'd only accept if. And it's making that stuff measurable and visible. And awareness is key. And the value of this is if you want to gain awareness with all your system partners of what services are out there, this is a great catalyst for that. I learned a lot of lessons in the process. One key thing would be to allocate as much time as you can manage, get the right people, as I've already said, and action logs, because there's actually, you'll be surprised about how many quick wins there are that you could just tick off the list straight away. We sent an evaluation afterwards, and as I said, we've got lots and lots of people involved, over 25 people from the system from lots of different places. It's important you get those key people involved. I'd say primary care are an absolute must. Out of hours primary care were a real winner for us, actually. Lots and lots of discussion with out of hours. A&E, the SDECs, and WAMAS, the key referrers in the system, and then those people who, you know, organise the services. And it was really positive. Everyone said, yeah, we'd like to do the out of hospital services now, and we'd like to do it exactly the same as we did. We used something called Jamboard, which is like a virtual whiteboard where people can stick post-it notes on. It works for us. People could do it how they want, and actually the dashboard that the team have now is really good, so we might not need that moving forward. But we had this in place so that when people were talking, other people in the background could start writing what they thought about the services and what their constraints are and improvements and what works really well. So now we're going to move on to the slides that essentially just the slides that I showed our senior leaders when we fed back. And I'm going to start with the key themes, which I'll come back to later, but as I'll go through each service briefly. But the same things were coming up for both the referrers to alternative services and the services themselves. And the first one was access. For example, things being not open to particular teams, so not being open to call handlers in 111, but it was open to clinicians, and that actually we had an opportunity there, or it wasn't open to community teams. Inconsistency, so services aren't 7 days a week, don't work for some people because they have to think about when they're open, when they're not. Services that are open 8 till 8, but actually stop referrals a couple of hours before. You have your GPs that say, well, that's when I get most of my referrals, so can I not refer a bit later on? So those kind of things came up. Timely, so phones not being answered. Oh, this service still works off a bleep. We have to wait for switchboard. And there were those shared conversations between the services and the referrers where they actually sat there and went, oh gosh, yeah, I didn't know it was that hard for you. And I've already mentioned it's the awareness, the genuine lack of knowledge in the system as to what services were there. And for example, when we were discussing hot clinic availability, one of our consultant colleagues from the acute was really open and honest, and Jenny, you'll remember this, and he said, gosh, if I'm a senior leader within our hospital and I don't know what services we have and how to access them, how can I expect anyone else? And those kind of conversations came up. Rejections was another thing, so that really puts people off. I think a lot of people will reflect upon that, particularly WAMAS. If they spend an hour trying to refer to a service and get through and then are getting rejected, they're less likely to try again. So that was something that came up. And then the services had an opportunity to feed back on their constraints. Capacity was a big issue, a lack of technology to give those timely responses to the referrers, access to a senior decision maker, which I'll mention later. And as a lot of people will be aware, services are really constrained, particularly in hospital, like assessment units and SDECs. Hospital flow is having such an impact on their ability. And actually, there was a lot of sympathy that the referrers from the community had after this meeting and this workshop, was saying, oh gosh, we didn't realise that's the kind of pressures you're dealing with. So I'm going to talk now about how I approached feeding all of this information back. So like I said, these are kind of indicative data. It's old, so it's not relevant now, but it just shows you how I approached after we had the scores. What did we do with it? So you've got a lot of information, and what you want to know is, where do I start? What is going to make the difference? So I said, well, let's try and measure what are the big ticket items and what are the quick wins. So we looked at the scores, as you can see on the screen. So this is the first bit, which was assessment units and hot clinics. And we said, okay, so how many, if we just dealt with that, what could we actually achieve if we were to pick that one area? And so these were our the results. So we can see here the scoring was quite low for access to speciality areas, so our assessment unit. And actually, if we, in the blue chart, you can see actually this is how many we could get out of A&E if those services were accessible. And so, you know, some big ticket items were our assessment units, and a lot of the comments were the process wasn't clear. We had to go through a bleep system, and that didn't work. And when we were talking between the teams, particularly GPs, were saying, gosh, we don't want to refer to these assessment units because we always just get told to go to A&E. And then the assessment units explained the process and why it's so difficult. And there was a lot of, oh, I see moments where they really understood each other. The PEG displaced PEG patient was actually a really interesting one. So this is an example of some of the ATED scenarios where there's only maybe 1 or 2 patients a month that will ever come, but it actually illustrates how hard it is to know what to do in those circumstances where you've got a patient, it seems obvious what they need to have, but where do you go? And hardly anyone knew what to do and where to go. And Chris actually was in the meeting and said something, you know, really poignant to really steer the discussion in the right direction, was how do we get the patient to the right person the first time? And everyone thought about it and said, you know what, we need to sort this out, because it's obvious that person who's got a PEG that's out needs to have it put back in. How do we get them to the person who can do that quickly? GAU, which we discussed in the hot clinics, they were really reflective, actually, and this shows an example of where you can get some great information out of your teams. They said, gosh, do you know what? After talking to all of you, we realised we could do better. One of the discussions was about GAU are great and they'll accept, but they always want a cannula and bloods first, and that's really difficult for the ED teams. And actually, really soon afterwards, that just stopped happening, and their numbers went up. So that was really great. Ophthalmology was an example of where out of hours came into their own, and you'll realise if you get your out of hours teams in, I think you'll find it quite shocking how little they have access to in those hours, outside normal working hours. I'm going to move on because I've talked about that slide quite a lot now. So SDECs. So I have to say, like I said earlier, things have changed a lot in terms of SDECs, but the missed opportunities, there could be 8 per day per ED that could actually get out of ED if they went straight to the SDECs. And the reason why the scores were low was because lack of direct streaming, no criteria, and that true 12-hour model. So they are open 12 hours, but they shut referrals. And that was a lot of the time due to having senior decision makers. And a big part was also the ambulatory nature of the patients they would take, but also the capacity. If they needed a bed for a patient, they couldn't get it. And out of hours definitely said you know what, the out of hours teams, so if I refer to medics in the out of hours, they don't really know about the SDEC, and therefore you can't get people booked in. So these great conversations were coming out and a lot of actions were taken forward. This slide was towards diabetes and head injuries. Great conversations came out about this. You can see that this is only about 8 to 10 per month in total for those two scenarios, but actually there were quick wins, and very quickly the community teams and the diabetic nurses made that connection with each other and said, yeah, we need to be more visible to you, and we worked out those pathways. There was also some ideas that came up through this. We discussed how cardiology have a really good advice and guidance service where you get a turnaround, quick turnaround within the day, and couldn't diabetes do something like that? And so these great conversations were coming out. Frailty, we realised there was a lot we needed to do around frailty, and so we had a lot of discussion, and the information we gained from talking about frailty really helped us contribute to our integrated frailty strategy as a system. But in the meantime, we were able to make the connections between our urgent community response services and our acute services, and that's created really good, really strong bonds, which have now built on their virtual ward work. So there's just so many wider opportunities in just having this conversation and undertaking this exercise. So that was a whistle stop of all the areas we covered. And I'm going back to our system themes and constraints. And I think it's really clear to see when you present it like that, what the opportunity is, were you to look at your scores and set out some actions. And I'm definitely going to advocate for my system that we repeat this exercise in a year's time and see how things have changed and whether those opportunities have been realised. So in terms of feedback that I sent back to the system, the DOS is key. It's the key to the system, and it's not always visible, and people don't always know about it. And so as a feedback from the ATED, we wanted to get people aware of the DOS and making sure their services are optimized on there. Consistency, 7 days working, that is a massive constraint for people, and that came out on our ATED scoring, and that's something we're definitely going to work on and are working on. And timeliness of referrals. People need it quick, and they need it to be the path of least resistance. Something that Chris said earlier, really resonates with me. ED is the path of least resistance at the moment, and we need to, we need to work out. Oh, sorry, Shelley, go ahead.
No, it was just to give you a 2-minute warning, and it's just to say, Matthew's popped that in the chat, but also just to say we do have a couple of questions on Minty for you specifically, and we might be able to take a couple hands because I think you're probably doing pretty good on time, but we'll set to check that. But that's for you you got 2 minutes.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to move on to the next slide. But these were what we found were system enablers, and these are the key themes that came up. And so hopefully they'll resonate with you, and you'll think, actually, do you know what, this is similar to us, and we need to, ATED would be really beneficial for us. So trust. There was a lack of trust between the teams, and so that was something that we knew we needed to work upon. And managing system capacity just came up constantly. We don't have capacity, the demands are coming at the wrong time. And streamlining access, these things just need to be clearer for the referrers as well as patients. And optimizing the DOS, I've already mentioned. I think we really need to be clear about how we can optimize the DOS to make sure that people are getting to the right place through those pathways. That's just an example of how I did the opportunity data. So, for SDEC, what's the missed opportunity, the zero length of stays that are going through other areas? Actually, how can we pull that quick win activity? And just a quick overview of what we've done since. So since then, we've done so much work on our SDECs and getting them more consistent. We've moved them to larger units, which was part of a bigger plan, but really it was a catalyst to it when we could see so clearly in these conversations how that was having a massive adding massive constraints to them. And moving forward, what we want to do is do it in our other place, and also so undertake it in Hereford, and then review it in a year to see actually have we got any better. So I will stop sharing now. Hopefully that was helpful to show you what it's like in reality, and I'll take a few questions.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much, Emily. I will have Jenny and Chris pop back up on the screen because I know you mentioned Chris a couple of times around who had joined the call. And I know Jenny's been with you on a journey and you guys have known each other for a bit. And it's always good to have those familiar faces with you. But I'm going to pop the screen up for you. You've got a specific one. People have been really great about putting names in the chat. Just to remind everybody on the call, if you do have a specific question for any of our speakers today, I'll ask Matthew to pop the agenda in so you can see their names. We've got Emily, Andrew, and then obviously our clinical leads, Jenny and Chris. So I'm going to pop the first question up for you, Emily. So hopefully you can see that. So the first question that we have for you is, Emily, did colleagues welcome the discussion more knowing this was not based on performance? What a great question. I'm going to drop the screen so you can answer that, and I'm going to mark it as answered.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you've got to have it like that. It can't be a stick to beat people with, really. It needs to be, we hear you, we hear it's not working for you, tell us. And so sometimes that can seem a bit negative, but actually people really welcomed it, didn't they, Jenny? They just wanted to get it out. And we said, you know, we're here to listen and we're here to collaborate. And when you have people like Jenny on the call, they spin it so positively in the meeting that it just goes the right way. And so, yeah, absolutely.
Fabulous. Jenny, over to you.
Yeah, just to endorse what Emily said, what we aim to do, and we set the scene very clearly from the outset, that it's a safe environment and folk can speak openly, they can speak honestly. We don't record the session. We capture the narrative, but as we're capturing the narrative, folk are seeing what we're capturing because we share the facilitation conversation. So really important that it really is a safe environment, and you find that the conversations naturally evolve and system partners will intuitively challenge each other, and I think Emily alluded to it, that as you're going through ATED, what is really stands quite foremost with me is that you can be making changes as you're going, so you can be updating your DOS. And Emily, we if you recall, we got our community response team, integrated care team, with the SDEC services talking to each other, and basically SDEC said, well, phone us directly if you've got a suitable referral, and then community says, well, if you need somebody pulling out on a early supported discharge pathway, this is our number. And that is absolutely invaluable, absolutely invaluable.
Jenny, thank you so much. That actually leads on to another question that we have. So you might have to keep your little hand up there anyway, because the next question we've got on here is, there's lots of potential referrers into alternatives to ED services. Did you, Emily, prioritize access to particular groups or teams? We find that access for 111 advisors and clinicians is an issue. What a fantastic question for you guys to kind of go through. So Emily, we'll have you go in first, and I bet Jen and Chris will have something to say.
Yeah, I think that was a really key, actually. And one of the bits I didn't mention on the slides because I was trying to go a bit quicker, was that we were really endorsing that the services just try to open up access, because we had the people from WAMAS and 111 there, and we said, you know, they're not trying, they're trying to get the right person, and they're going to get to you anyway, so just try it and see. And a lot of services were able to say, do you know what, we actually turned on a pathway from our call handlers, and it wasn't that bad. In fact, it was great, and we just saw people getting to us quicker rather than just seeing this you know, waterfall of patients that we couldn't deal with. So 111 call handlers was definitely an area. WAMAS and then GP was another key referrer. Yeah,
that's fantastic, Emily. Go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, just on that point, really. I think for me, there is something that we really do tease out, is the equity of access for all our stakeholders within the system, and it's something that probably it's quite organic, Emily, isn't it, in the conversations when we get going with the discussions and the facilitation, and it really does, and a lot of it is relationship building. It's purely relationship building, and a lot of times, you know, we don't put all these people in the same arena together. We can have A&E delivery boards, but that's very exec driven. Whereas you've got the doers coming together and having those conversations. It's really powerful stuff. Really powerful.
Thank you so much, Jenny. Emily, you do have a couple more questions. What I am going to do, though, is I'm going to give people a little bit of a break. Please, people, hang on. The last part of our session is a Q&A with our expert panel. Emily, you've got some questions around high-intensity users and equity of access. What Jen, it's like you're psychic and you can see the questions coming. It's like you've been doing this a while. So we're going to take a really, really quick break, everyone, just to kind of give you 5 minutes. I'm just going to share on my screen really quickly the little break session, just to say we will pop back into the chat the Menti information. Please keep those questions coming. Please like those questions for us, and then we'll get started, and we'll have Jen introduce our next speaker, Andrew. So everyone have a really, really quick break. In the middle of your break, or if you're already prepared, please check the QR code. That QR code specifically on the screen is for our NHS Futures website, but please enjoy the break. And we'll see you guys in about 3-4 minutes. See you in a minute. Thanks for coming back so soon, Emily. Really, really great session. And for those that are still on the call, really funnily enough, Andrew and Emily know each other from well back in the day, and we had a bit of a reunion yesterday, didn't we, guys? So hopefully they'll be able to play off of each other's experience and information. So really thank you both so much for coming back today. We're going to give everybody just 1 more minute before we get started again, if that's all right. And then I'll put some of the information up. Lots of questions in Menti for you guys, so I hope you're ready for an expert panel session. Andrew, I'm going to drive your slides for you.
Brilliant, thank you.
So we'll get you started here in just a few minutes. Let's just give everybody 1 more minute. just a reminder for everybody, I keep trying to put it as important in the chat. Please keep those questions coming on our Menti. Matthew's popped into the agenda all of our speakers, so please like the questions that you see. You should be able to see everyone else's questions. Please join our Futures page. There's lots of really great information on there. The team have popped in our address for how you can contact us as far as the information goes, and then we'll have them pop in the Menti just one more time for people before Andrew gets started for some of those questions, and then we will carry on because we are getting lots and lots of likes around these questions, which is fantastic. Jenny, I'm going to pass over to you to introduce the lovely Andrew, and we'll get started.
Thanks, Shelley. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Andrew Cox. Andrew approached us around undertaking ATED across his North Central London ICB, and we agreed and we accommodated, and Andrew has done some amazing stuff post ATED with the work and the outputs that have come out. And just to say that whilst we undertake ATED, we're always on the lookout for little gems of best practice, and myself, Chris Moulton, and some other members of the national team visited some of the services that we identified as potential best practice yesterday. So Andrew, thank you for first of all undertaking ATED, and secondly giving us the opportunity to come down and speak to some amazing people who are doing an absolute sterling job down there. So without any further ado, Andrew, you've got the floor.
Thank you, Jenny. So yeah, can you just move to this next slide, Shelley? Brilliant. So just to say, I am working as the regional DOS lead. I sit within the UEC regional team in NHS London, England, or England, London. And I worked really sort of collaboratively with the ICS lead, commissioning lead for urgent emergency care, as well as the national IUEC team to kind of drive this process forward in North Central London. So we've heard around ATED and kind of what it is, and really that it kind of helps evaluate the current alternatives to ED and admissions and admission pathways across the UEC footprint. And we've heard around the kind of core 3 distinct stages, so I'm not going to kind of repeat those, but what I do think is really important is looking at it through the sort of the lens of the Director of Services, and I know we've got some Director of Service colleagues on the call, so happy to answer any questions that they might have around the DOS aspects of this. So yeah, as Jenny mentioned, it came through to us as part of the, or through to me as an opportunity as part of the wider sort of NHS 111 Further Faster programme. And instinctively, I kind of looked at this and thought this is a really, really good opportunity to understand some of the patient flow and bringing together system partners, and not that it's just purely a DOS driven thing. I think it's much greater than just the DOS. And in tandem, the London region was also rolling out something called the Missed Opportunity Audit with EDs, which is just another lens really looking at kind of the flow through the front door of the EDs. And what this does is then help triangulate some of that data in just a different way of looking at it really. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is the sort of summary of that process that we've undertaken in North Central London. And essentially the slides that you'll see were the ones that kind of I supported the development of, or developed and shared with the ICS so that they could take this back through their sort of board governance and local stakeholders. So Shelley, if you just go to the next slide. So just some context around North Central London. So we have a mixture of co-located ED UTCs as well as some standalone ones. But what this slide really seeks to do is just illustrate the kind of wider UEC system. So it's not just EDs and UTCs. There's actually a series of system or services and system partners that operate coherently with one another. So you can see we have the sort of out of hours and 111 services, our colleagues in the London Ambulance Service, as well as sort of other urgent emergency care partners such as Moorfields, who provide specialist eye services. And then if you go to the next slide, you can see again community, social services, mental health, and primary care. So this was just really to provide a bit of a visual around the kind of wider system partners required to be part of the phase 3 process of ATED, really. If you go to the next slide. So similar to Emily, what we did was approach it in for stages. So we did our stage 1 with our sort of SME DOS colleagues, and then we then got together and did the process with or phase 2, again, kind of just validating some of that information with the commissioner and SME DOS colleagues. And then phase 3, it was around bringing those system partners together. And when we got the reports and we started to get through to the sort of phase 3 process, this is where the SEDIT data came into play. So really, this is just a visual around kind of the opportunity and why what's demonstrated in the following slides is reflective of this data, essentially. So the SEDIT data for patients submitted not via the ED is around 50%, and that's data that's published nationally. And what we can see here is the kind of the levels of patients that are not admitted via the ED. And obviously then that sets the scene for the following slides. So if you go to the next slide. So when we finished the process of ATED, we were issued a sort of a lengthy report from the IUC team, and that report is really helpful in terms of understanding the core elements of the discussions. But what I really wanted to do is provide the sort of provide a summary back to the ICS in a more visual way, and really reflect the process. And this is kind of how I've designed this slide. So we've got on the top here a green box which kind of shows the recommended or standard hours or for commissioned hours for the service, and then the ATED clinical scenario is at the top in the italic. So this is really focused on the surgical wound infection 5 days post-op, and then it kind of also shows the kind of specialties and services that are really sort of linked to this sort of flow and accessibility of that clinical scenario. And what we can see is when we did both the sort of the 3 stages, we could see that there was no service profiled on the DOS for a surgical wound post-op, 5 days post-op. It wasn't typically a commission pathway, although obviously there is lots of discussions around same-day emergency care. And really the feedback from the wider system partners was that it was quite difficult to manage these patients outside of the front door or outside of the ED setting. And that what we've done is essentially provide a summary of the conversations that happened across each of the EDs, across each of the system partners, to just provide some narrative in a coherent way around what were some of the challenges and make it a bit more easy to digest, really. If you go to the next slide. So same again, but this is just a different scenario. So this is an ATED scenario for same-day emergency care for a stable medical patient, and this essentially showed us that we did have obviously a very strong push for, and we still do have strong sort of push for same-day emergency care services. And there is definitely excellent footprint, although there's a couple of services that we kind of needed to put on the DOS, and work then sort of kind of was focused in terms of bringing those patient or those services on board. And then again, you can see there was the feedback from system partners around kind of the accessibility. So essentially some of the feedback was around it's sometimes difficult to identify these services in the directory of services or through the products available. Sometimes SDEC services were requesting diagnostic works, etc. And so patients were inevitably ending up in the front door of ED. So it really provided a really focused point to discuss some of the sort of the pathway challenges really between services. If you go to the next one. And again, similar, this is just another example. So a fall in a care home with no apparent injury. And again, whilst we had both the services commissioned on the DOS and commissioned, and they were very visible on the DOS. It was then really a great opportunity for the system partners to have a conversation around actually how accessible are these services. And we can see that currently, whilst they're on the DOS, they were only commissioned or open for 12 hours a day, and the national standard was suggesting sort of 24 hours. And we can see that there's sort of a distinction between patients being on the floor for over or under 2 hours, which then inevitably meant that they would end up in the ED essentially. Just moving on. So this slide is really around the reflection and learning on the process, and what we've done is outlined the kind of the positives, the challenges, and then potential future improvements that we would do if we were to take it forward in other areas of the region. So the positives really were that it provided a really excellent opportunity for system-wide discussion, for shared learning and pathway development, and much of what Emily was saying before around people learning around how other services operate were all part of the process that we went through as well. Another real strong positive was that halfway through the process, the National IUC team introduced the electronic version of ATED, so we were able to utilize that and sort of move away from the sort of the process where we were using spreadsheets and having to document that. So it just helped facilitate the process and made it much slicker for our DOS colleagues to kind of input the data and generate some of the scoring in a quicker way. I think it's really useful to bring in some of the DOS subject matter experts. So in my regional role, obviously, I'm not kind of familiar with all of the subtle nuances. So bringing that SME into to support some of the process around what's profiled, where, what hours, what's the instructions is really helpful. Bringing that sort of the DOS element to it. We had lots of really useful discussion and engagements from stakeholders. And what was really beneficial was it was led by the ICS. So the commissioning lead took the kind of process through the UEC program board locally to get buy-in from wider system stakeholders. Again, sort of with the message that it wasn't a performance tool or management tool, and that it was really just an opportunity to discuss and reflect on the existing pathways and look for opportunities for improvement essentially. So some of the challenges, oh sorry, just go back to the next slide. That's fine. So some of the challenges that we had. So it is, I guess, the stage 3. I mean, this process is definitely you need to be committed because it's about coordinating all of these the system-wide stakeholders, and that there is definitely an administrative sort of challenge there. But yeah, so making sure that obviously people are in attendance, and I think we were really strict in terms of if we didn't have the right stakeholders or right representation from system partners, then there wasn't really much point in us progress or kind of continuing with the conversation that day. So we then had to reschedule the meeting because it's really valuable to have everybody represented. We had lots of system pressures, so COVID and other system pressures kind of got in the way sometimes, so we had to sort of reschedule quite frequently, but we got there in the end, and it was really valuable to have everybody together. We had some feedback from one of the sites that it might have been useful to understand a little bit more around the scenarios and the questions that were being asked, and so we did kind of provide a bit more of an overview of the way ATED worked before the session in subsequent meetings. And then one of the key bits as well was just thinking about when we had different chairs and scribes in the meeting, it was sometimes, I guess, making sure that there was a consistent sort of approach to sort of soliciting the information and probing and making sure you're getting the right information and sort of feedback from the system partners is really critical. So given London's geography, it would sort of potentially thinking about future improvements, it might be useful to consider a face-to-face session with wider system partners. It might make this sort of process easier, and we're obviously recognizing that it's challenging to get everybody in a room, and so, but potentially something we can consider. I think so Chris Moulton did one of the chairing or chaired one of the sessions, and that was kind of really excellent because it really helped and sort of drive some of the sort of feedback, and kind of having that clinician view and that clinician to clinician engagement is really, really invaluable. And then using one chair and agree sort of the weighting, I think. So there's a scoring metrics for each of the clinical scenarios, particularly around the accessibility. And so if everybody's looking at it through the same lens, is really, really helpful. And then you've got no sort of disparity or discrepancies, and everybody's kind of weighting it the same, really. Just move on to the next one. So there was a series of recommendations and next steps that were agreed as an output to this. North Central London explored what direct pathways could be opened, and we'll talk about that in a second. But it really needs to be underpinned by demand and capacity to ensure that there's sufficient resources. And I think it's fine to kind of look at, well, I guess, opening up pathways, etc. But we just need to understand the impact of that before doing so. And then North Central also looked at, and I think one of the things that Emily mentioned was there were some real quick wins. So when we went through the Directory of Services, there were sort of immediate things that we could do to sort of strengthen some of the profiles or some of the opening hours, and just kind of looking at kind of sort of those quick wins versus the sort of longer term development things for the DOS. Exploring things around, or exploring pathways, particularly around sort of direct access for advice and guidance, was one of the key sort of things that came out of a lot of the discussions, particularly around accessing sort of support from remotely via EDs. And I think that's kind of there's conversations happening and just looking at how that might work in practice. And then North Central London, and this was really insightful because there was, once the system stakeholders were having conversations, it was apparent that there was kind of a blocker in terms of community services because they would only administer the second dose of antibiotics. And so there was a quick sort of just conversation around actually how could we move away from only the second dose and actually introduce the first administration dose as well. And then there's been a series of trainings processes that have happened, particularly around homelessness, and that's been delivered by the national team. And then also looking at how we triangulate the findings of the ATED processes with the outputs of the missed opportunity audits, which are sort of all part of wider strategy conversations. So Jenny mentioned earlier, there were some areas of excellence identified, which the National IUC team went to yesterday to review, particularly around mental health and CareLink, so CareLink or SilverLink triage processes that are in place in the area. So that was really insightful and useful to share. Next slide. And then there was a series of sort of first line further development since the completion of the ATED process. So North Central London went live with criteria for 909 referrals for SDEC. They've also done a series of developments around SDEC direct booking at the Whittington Hospital. And a series of wider sort of community pilots that were put into place, as well as virtual services. So just really expanding the offer around alternatives to ED, essentially, which were all part and parcel, and the ATED process really helped to drive some of those things forward, essentially. So that is my slides. I think I'm a little bit before the time, but hopefully people might have some questions.
Yeah, I'm just going to have a look through those while we're on here. If I could just grab Ginny and Chris really quick to maybe pick up on some of the points around having that clinician in the room and some of those points that you found about it, because we've had a long conversation, and since Andrew and Emily have done that, the team has expanded, but we've also put some more key kind of processes in place. We've actually shared those with Andrew and Emily, and they hopped on the opportunity to see the dashboard and see their information in a different light from where they're at. So you'll also see that Matthew Eustace, our colleague, has put that into the chat. Just to say, Matthew didn't get a chance to introduce himself, I don't think, earlier. He's one of our work stream managers, and he works incredibly hard and is a whiz with the dashboard and has done a huge amount of work around it. So over to you guys while I pull up the questions.
I would just say that the only reason really for having clinicians there is just to sometimes put a light on the reality of things, you know, because sometimes you're not a clinician, you can't see why faxing something at midnight to a remote number in Timbuktu isn't a good idea. But, you know, as a clinician, you know, that doesn't often work. So it is just putting a bit of a reality on that. It's not that the clinicians have any special knowledge about referral systems or anything like that.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. Hopefully everyone is now going to be able to see my screen. So we have 10 questions, but we've got lots of likes on those questions. So we may have some really specific ones that are on here. So if I go with the best liked first, and Andrew, if we get some that are specific for you, I will get to those here in just a second, if that's okay. There's no doubt be a useful tool, but there is still the so what question. We know many trusts and systems are not good at acting on the outcomes of such reviews. What will happen if they don't act on those opportunities? What would you guys say?
I think for me that it goes back to the ethos of the tED tool is not a performance management tool, so we won't be holding any systems to account if they do not take forward any of the recommendations. So that's really the first thing to say. The other thing is that I think by undertaking the exercise, you automatically and by default go into that conversation around what do we need to do to identify and address the gaps. And I'll hand over to Emily.
Thanks, Jenny. I think from a kind of commissioner point of view, we can't shy away from the fact that you need accountability and ownership of this. In our system, we ran this driven through a pre-hospital program we have, which has really good engagement. You know, and you do need that. You know, you have to have the system buy-in, you have to have them wanting to do that. And this is why I went with the approach of looking at those missed opportunities, which it sounds like Andrew's system did as well, but it's showing them tangibly. If you solve these intangible, difficult to solve issues, this is the result you could get. This is how many you could get out of your EDs. And that's a really key thing for people to get the buy-in. We can't move away from that. You have to have people wanting to do it. I was really lucky, particularly around our UCR teams, our urgent community response, had a lead who really wanted to take this and run with it. And I think having that, we're going to do this in a year's time and have a look at what we've done, or in 6 months' time, could be a good way of getting people to engage.
That's great. Thanks so much, Emily. We've got some more questions here. I'm trying not to give everybody a bit of death by PowerPoint so you can actually see our speaker's face to open up those kind of conversations. So the next question we have is, this is more about the community and integrated care rather than ED. Do the panel think that the lack of standardization in STEER is not helping improving access? What a fantastic question for the panel. Jenny, Chris, do you guys want to lead on that? And then Andrew and Emily, you've kind of been at the end of this as far as kind of the receiving end of it. But if I go to Chris first and then Jenny.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. This is more about things other than the ED, because it's about alternatives to ED. Because once somebody comes to the ED, really, they rightly expect to be seen in the ED. They don't want to be put on a bus and sent to the other end of town or told to come back next week. So yeah, it's about really getting people to the right service before they come to ED. And so is a group of people that can be diverted from the ED, but it's much better to get them to the right place first. In terms of lack of standardisation, well, that's a national problem, really, isn't it? The National Health Service isn't really a national health service. It's a national provision of healthcare, but standardisation just isn't there. And for what it's worth, all the services we've listed on the ATED, all those 40 questions, including the 6 alternative to admissions questions, they all relate to nationally recommended services. So they're all things that are nationally recommended. They're not things that we've just cooked up. They're all things that should be standardized throughout the country. So hopefully we're just helping to make those national services roll out. Thanks,
Chris. Andrew?
So I was just going to say, I think for me, the reflection is about UEC as a system of system partners, which is what this really does well, is in terms of bringing everybody together as a wider. So it's kind of wider than just community and integrated care. It's kind of the whole UEC system that sort of underpin this, really.
That's great. Thanks, Andrew. You can see there's also some comments scrolling across the screen. We've got a lot of really great activity going on. I'm going to mark that as answered. Can you give us examples of where you've seen the outcomes of ATED used well and why it's worked, if this isn't already covered by the speakers? So I think that you guys definitely showed some outcomes today around some of the services and some of the best practice. But if you guys wouldn't mind to highlight a couple of these, because we still got questions coming in thick and fast, and we've got about 10 minutes or so to answer them. Jenny?
Thanks, Shelley. So if I can come in on that one, I think for me, one of the biggest examples of this is the work that we're currently doing in Medway. So Medway undertook ATED as part of a wider Harris piece of work, and subsequently they've developed a delivery plan, and we've got a member of our staff supporting the delivery and the execution of that plan, and we're working really tightly with Medway currently, and that's incorporating a range of initiatives such as reviewing the DOS, looking at their UTC provision, levelling up their UTC MRU, etc. provision that they've got, looking at access into same-day emergency care. They've done an amazing piece of work with their ambulance handovers. They haven't seen a 60-minute ambulance handover breach for months. So I think if folk want a good example, I think, Chris, would you agree Medway is a bit of a star at the minute?
Yeah, yes, they are. They've a system that's had quite a lot of troubles, but at the moment they've built a whole delivery plan around ATED, and even as we speak, actually, they're working on it this morning. So that's great.
Yeah.
That's great, guys. Thank you so much. I'm going to move on to the next question, which is, who is expected to lead on this program? UEC managers, DOS leads, or commissioners? If it's okay, if I could take this one, just because I'm doing some of the rollout, and then you guys can tip in. I think you can see it's quite varied. You know, we've got Andrew, who's a regional DOS lead, who is also a nurse by background. We've also got Emily, who is in UEC transformation, has done many roles. You've got the lovely Jenny Sears Brown, who could tell you a raft of different things that she's done clinically and across the system over the years. And we've got Chris Moulton as an ED consultant. So there's definitely lots of people expected. We do work in an ICS capacity, so really getting the ICS, ICB on board to maybe do, say, if you've got 3 or 5 sites, getting all those sites signed up to do this as type of the acute type 1, you really start to get that ICS view back into some of your outcomes. And especially now that we have the dashboard and the reporting, we're able to pull that together so that you get a system view, a regional view, and a national view around alternatives to ED. So lots of people can lead on it. Chris, Jen, have you any comments on that?
No, I think you've summed it up really. I think for me, anybody can lead on it. I think the real gem is making sure that you get all your system stakeholders on phase 3. That's where you get your bang for your buck with ATED, to get those discussions going.
Thank you so much, Jen. And we've tried to streamline the process a bit because back in the day it was just kind of Jenny, Chris, and a couple of IUEC team members, but the team's expanded. So we do organize that for you. You've got some really clear communication around what's expected. We presented a lot of your ICB boards around that piece of work and lots of DOS leads, because I can see there's lots of DOS leads on the call as well too. So next question we've got is, how do we know that just because a service doesn't exist, it needs to exist to make a material impact on flow and patient movement? What a great question. Who wants to take that one?
I'm happy to go first if that's okay.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so I think that's why we did the missed opportunity part of it, and I think pairing it with that in your system's a really good thing to do, to see, you know, so if we looked at this bit, actually, is that going to make a massive difference? And sometimes they're small numbers but quick wins, and so that's a yes. And sometimes they're big numbers and they might be bigger problems, but you think, gosh, we really need to tackle that. And something that we haven't mentioned about this tool and what's so great about all the scenarios is it gives you a starting place. What's really difficult, particularly as an urgent emergency care commissioning manager, you could pick so many things to go and look at. And what this gives you is a framework of scenarios to work your way through, because there's so many different things that you could look at. And this gives you a really good framework for that. And it's based on evidence, which I think is really important.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Emily. Andrew?
And I wholeheartedly agree with that. And that's why we kind of try to outline it in the way that we did in terms of the write-up, because it then gives the ICS the ability to prioritize certain elements of you know, in terms of what will offer the most kind of opportunity, essentially. And then I think the sort of demand and capacity element is also really, really key. So yeah, looking at those things through those lenses is really, really important.
That's great. Thank you, Andrew. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, some of the things you can put in the just do it category, can't you?
Yeah.
Because if people with PEG tubes haven't got a place to go when their PEG falls out, the only reason you wouldn't need a proper service is either you've no patients with PEG tubes, or you put the PEG tubes in so amazingly well they never fall out. But if either of those things aren't true, then you do need a service for people with PEG tubes that fall out. So some of the things, you know, I would say, you know, even though I'm sort of data obsessed, you don't need data for. They are just in the category of blindingly obvious.
Great, thanks, Chris. We have a question for Emily or Andrew, so or you both can. Just to say, we've only got a few minutes left, so I'm going to try to take probably one more question, which is probably the most liked one. And then what I will ask is if our experts wouldn't mind if I circulate the questions, maybe we could have some kind of FAQs or some Q&As for the pack for after. So have Emily or Andrew or others seen material impacts on ED safety and performance as a result of strengthening ATED?
Do you want me to go first? So I think the answer to that is directly myself, no, because I think we've just kind of come out of that process, and I think essentially it gives the opportunity and the framework to kind of go away and strengthen elements of the UEC pathway. And then I think it is about kind of potentially going back to redo it to see this is the baseline, and then this is where we're at now after a period of time and having focused on all of these things. So yeah.
And I would second that. It's all about going back and reviewing. Certainly in our urgent community response teams, we've seen a real difference in the way they interact with services. And I think this really, you know, initiated the connections they've then made, and their referrals through a lot of different actions, but a lot of them were, you know, the catalyst was ATED. They've just increased their referrals from all different sources. And that's really helped the ED, and the ED have said, gosh, you know, it's really made a difference to us. But obviously the pressures are so high. We've had so much going on over winter. It's really difficult to section off, oh yeah, that was a result of this.
Oh, that's really helpful, Emily. I'm going to take this last question for you guys. Is there an awareness in systems about what is expected on the DOS? So interesting question, I think, for us to answer around that, because we obviously do feature the DOS quite heavily as part of our baseline. Andrew, I've seen you take your mic off. I'm going to hand it over to you.
I mean, I'm not sure it's about what's expected on the DOS, but I suppose what it is about whether there's an awareness of the DOS and how that kind of provides a real strong opportunity for the UEC system in terms of, you know, making services accessible and providing, you know, a way of showing that these services are in existence essentially. So yeah,
that's great. Thanks, Andrew. I'll take one more and then we're going to move on to next steps and we'll close our Q&A panel. Do we think that the coordination of urgent care options is the major gap here? That's an interesting one. Anyone want to take that one first? Jenny, I saw your mic go off.
Absolutely brilliant question. I think for me, I think reflecting on ATED, and it's reflecting on Emily's comment earlier, the navigation across our healthcare systems is difficult for those who think they know what's in the healthcare system. So for somebody who maybe not as aware or totally blind to what's in the healthcare system, I think it really does shine a light on the complexity of the navigation, and any opportunity where we can streamline that navigation and getting the access right first time, we should seize. And we've seen, and just relating onto the wider conversations where we've over the past 2 years where we've been working from an IUEC perspective intensely with some of our ICSs, where they have introduced a care coordinated approach, we do see those efficiencies and that ease of navigation in there. Thanks, Shelley.
And if I can just add to that, I would say we've really got to get out of the habit of, we've really got to get out of the habit of blaming the patient. You know, it's our job to make that navigation easy. It's our job to make the systems work, and it's our job to make those pathways really easy to find. It's not their fault that they can't find the pathway.
Absolutely, Chris. I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's attended and our panel members. Please don't run off too quickly because I can see some of the numbers dropping. Just to kind of share next steps is please contact our team. If somebody wouldn't mind to pop in the Menti code one more time, I've now put up the voting. We just need a little bit of feedback. It's just 4 questions around today's session. Contact us. We'll set up a one-to-one with our team and your system or ICS or individuals. We'll take you through a detailed walkthrough of the process and tool. Sign up, be part of the opportunity. We're here to help, and have a look through our future site for other offers. And also you get access to a really fantastic group of specialists. So if you wouldn't mind, if you could give us some feedback. Sarwar's popped it into the chat. It'll allow us the opportunity to be able to kind of hear. Thank you for the lovely votes and stuff so far. If you wouldn't mind to keep voting, find out what it is that you need at the end of the day. We're here for you. That's what we're here for. And just really a big thank you to our speakers and everyone who's attended and made it possible. Please get in touch with us. We'll be sending out the information, and then this recorded session will be up on our NHS Futures. But please, please, please definitely do pop onto our Menti chat and finish off the voting, and we'll circulate the rest of those questions. Other than that, I'm going to leave this up on the screen for the next couple of minutes, and a big thank you to everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.